So thank you. So good evening and welcome to the King's Entrepreneurship Labs. Let's talk marketing with Sir Martin Sorrell. So guys, I'm Cheryl Kwesiak, King's Entrepreneurship Labs entrepreneur in residence. I have the pleasure of leading this evening's discussion. Before we begin, I would just like to run through a few housekeeping rules, please. Feel free to say hi to Sir Martin on chat and let me and the organizers know if you cannot hear us. Following the introduction, we will close the chat and open up our questions facility. We are expecting a flood of questions, so please do be sharp, concise, and polite with your line of questioning and like the questions that you want to get asked the most. So after the end of the 25-minute interview with Sir Martin, we will open to your questions with our Entrepreneurship Lab associate, Michaela Kadlikova, who will deliver the questions. Please note that this call is being recorded so that those who couldn't tune in tonight can also benefit. So now on with our talk. A man that needs no introductions with his achievements speaking for themselves. Sir Martin Sorrell is founder and executive chairman of S4 Capital PLC, a new age, new era, purely digital advertising and marketing services business for global, multinational, and millennial-driven influencer brands. S4 Capital PLC merged with Media Monks, its content practice in July 2018, and Mighty Hive, its data and digital media practice in December 2018. It is listed on the London Stock Exchange and has over 7,000 people in 33 countries with a market capitalization in excess of $4 billion. Sir Martin was founder and CEO of WPP for 33 years, building it from a £1 million shell company in 1985 into the world's largest advertising and marketing services company. When Sir Martin left in April 2018, WPP had a market capitalization of over 16 billion pounds, revenues of over 15 billion, profits of approximately 2 billion, and over 200,000 people in 113 countries. So he was ranked as the second best CEO in the world by Harvard Business Review in 2017 and was nominated as one of Time's 100 most influential people. Good evening again, Sir Martin. Welcome. Thank you,
Cheryl. Thank you. Thanks for the intro. My mother would be, if she was still alive, would be very pleased by that. But probably the only person who would agree with it too. So.
Oh no, anyway. Very impressive. So, Sir Martin, clearly you have been a very busy man throughout your life, including over the pandemic. Given that we are harnessing an entrepreneurial mindset here at King's, we'd love to know how your entrepreneurial journey began. Would you enlighten us?
Yeah, I guess it goes back to my father, who said his advice was to find an industry that you enjoyed, and then find a company within that industry that you enjoyed, and then build a reputation in it, not external reputation, but internal. And then if you fancied trying something on your own, by all means do it. I think the age that he thought probably a bit old-fashioned in this day and age, but maybe right. Maybe right, maybe wrong. We can go into that. He believed, you spend about 20 years building the reputation, and then at the age of 40, let's say you started around 20, at the age of 40, you look back at what you do and then look forwards to what you're going to do. And you can then decide on whether you want to do something on your own or continue as you did in the first 20 years. So that was the advice. I think that's probably to some extent outdated advice, in fairness, because things are moving at warp speed in comparison to the experience my father had. And if you look at the FTSE 100 or the S&P 500, I can't remember, McKinsey did a survey. I think the average company lasts for about 12 years in those indices. So and the conventional wisdom now, I mean, the people on this call might be advised not even to complete their education. I would disagree with that, but you've got a number of good examples of people leaving Stanford or Harvard or wherever it is, and before they've qualified, and building mega-sized or meta-sized companies without qualifications. And people, and the advice that probably you would get today is to flit from flower to flower, build experience in one place and then another place and get a variety of experiences. And then if you want to do something on your own, so it'd be very different to what he said to me. And I was thinking about it actually last night, and there may be something in the volatility argument that if you see how everybody is very focused on the short term. I mean, private equity in the UK market is probably the most dominant force. Running a listed company is increasingly regulated and constrained, and whereas private equity can operate under the radar, it probably accounts for about, I don't know, 15% of the world economy, but at the margin, the marginal deal, probably 1/3 of the transactions that take place, if not more, are private equity. So it's where companies are delisting. The UK market is even in these difficult stock markets at the moment, is regarded as being less highly valued than, say, the US market. There's a significant difference. So you're going to continue to see take private transactions, which increase the private sector as opposed to the listed sector. I mean, it's quite interesting actually that if I was to ask you, of the top 100 liquid companies, how many are here in the UK in the FTSE 100? The answer to that question is 0. Whereas, I don't know, 10 years ago, it used to be 15 or 20 with Shell or Unilever or whoever it happened to be. The liquidity of the US markets and the scale of the US market is so huge that they're dominant. Anyway, so it may be that circumstances are very different to when I had that conversation with my dad, which would have been in about the 1970s. So way before most of the people on this call were even thought of. So it's different, but that's where I got it from. So I came out of B school, started in consulting, went to work for McCormack, then James Gulliver. I tried something with my dad, which didn't work. Then James Gulliver, then met the Saatchi brothers, who James Gulliver. That was an industry I liked, and Saatchi's was a company I liked in that industry. And then I've had 3 iterations: one at Saatchi's, one at WPP, and now the 3rd at S4.
Brilliant. And just jumping ahead, Sir Martin, S4 Capital appears to be reinventing advertising and marketing services in our era of digital technologies and within the globally interconnected and post-pandemic world that we're in. But before S4, you built up WPP into the world's largest advertising and marketing services company. So at 40 years old, did you think that WPP would become the success it became?
Well, you never know. I think entrepreneurs are inherently insecure. David Ogilvy, when Ogilvy went public in 1985, sold pretty much all of his shares and bought a pink chateau in the middle of France at Chateau Tufu, which seemed like a good idea at the time. Swapping the insecurities or uncertainties of the ad business with clients, etc., and people, for the security of a piece of property. I doubt whether that asset is worth more than sort of $6 or $7 million nowadays, and therefore that was probably the benefit of 2020 hindsight, the wrong decision. But it's true. I mean, I think the point is true that entrepreneurs, although they do take risks, the word entrepreneur means risk taker. It doesn't mean me taking risks with your money. It means me taking risks with my money, putting my money where my mouth is. So true entrepreneurship, not stock options, which are, heads I win, tails you lose. Warren Buffett used to say, still does, I think, you wouldn't give an institution an option on your stock for 10 years at zero cost. So why do you give management that? And I do believe fundamentally that people should put their money where their mouth is and build the operation with risk. But the flip side of that is that I think people tend to be a little bit insecure and tend to want to, quite rightly, capitalize. I mean, the structures that we've put together at S4 for our mergers are half shares, half cash, and that acknowledges that people want, it's perfectly respectable to take some money off the table and reinvest or roll the other half of their consideration into the company to help build it. Because our objective of S4 is to build a new model and disrupt the old. Mm-hmm. So it's a sort of Amazonian or Teslan in that sense. But I've had 3 iterations, at Saatchi's, where we also, when I left Saatchi's, that was the biggest agency group. I was CFO there, and that was the biggest agency group in the world. And then we started WPP from scratch in '85, and I think by about '96 or '97, maybe it was 2000 with the merger with Y&R. We were 2/3 of the combined company. Y&R was 1/3. We created the largest group in the world.
Mm. So, Sir Martin, you mentioned disruption. S4 seems to be on course to disrupt the traditional marketing and advertising industry, including WPP. An interesting point, too, is that S4 is targeting millennial-driven influencer brands, and not to sound ageist or anything, but you're not a millennial, yet you seem to be succeeding at achieving your aims. Like, how? Why is that?
Well, we've got a very clear objective, which is to build the new advertising and marketing services model. That's a model, the existing model, the holding company model, which I in part, along with many others, developed, really has been going since Marion Harper in the 1950s. So it's a 70-year-old model, which now in this digital era. I mean, I've gone through 3 iterations. The globalization iteration through Saatchi's, Ted Levitt. If the people on this call haven't read the Harvard Business Review of October, I think it was 1983, they should do. It's the globalization article that Levitt wrote, where basically he said, somewhat controversially, and he over-egged it to make the point, consumers are going to consume everything in the same way. Now, we did a reprise of his article in 2003 at Harvard with John Quelch, who was on the board at WPP, marketing professor at HBS. And Ted, before he died, sadly of cancer, a few years later, he did say that he over-egged the pudding to make the point. But that was the first iteration. So that was the modus vivendi or objective of Saatchi. So around globalization, that tastes were, I was in my class at business school, there was the son of the president of Procter & Gamble, and we thought Procter & Gamble was a worldwide firm because 10% of its revenues in those days came from outside the US. So it wasn't really global. So that was the first thing. And then WPP was about globalization. And then the rise of technology. S4 is purely about technology. In fact, anything from a globalization point of view might be going the other way. We're in 33 countries. We've been at this for 3.5 years. And we're in 33 countries, about 8,200 people now. And I doubt whether we'll go to much more than 36, 37, 38. Might go a little bit further, but it won't be the 113 that we had at WPP. So it's about technology. And then our purpose or our mission our purpose is to create jobs. Would you believe? It's not necessarily to make the world a better place. It's probably to make the world a better place by providing more employment. But our mission is around building that new model and disrupting the old. And then we have 4 basic constitutional amendments. The first would be purely digital, because digital is 60% of our addressable markets, which total about 1.4 trillion. That's media advertising 750 billion, marketing services 500, trade budgets 800 billion, and digital transformation about 400 billion. So that totals up to about 1.4. It's growing. That market is, or those markets are growing at about 15-20%. And digital is about 60% of the media market, will be 70% by 2024. So that's number one. Number two, our model is a data-driven model. So it's an iterative model. It's rather like, we call it the Holy Trinity. So it's data driving the creation of content and its distribution through digital media and through planning and buying in a continuous loop. So the work we do for Netflix, for example, when we're doing a campaign for Narcos 3, we'll create technically about 1.6 million different creative executions. Probably use about 50 to 70,000 of them. But these are executions where we measure people's reaction. You know, we may know Cheryl likes business. She's on the Wall Street Journal website, so we feed her an ad that compares Narcos 3 to a business. Or you're on the Manchester United site and we know that you're interested in football, we compare it to a football team. So it's really personalization at scale. So that's the second point. Thirdly, we go to market as faster, better, cheaper. Fast is about agility, because that's the key corporate attribute, particularly in a world ravaged by COVID. But you know, COVID has accelerated things. It didn't create those trends. So agility key. Better means understanding the digital ecosystem, and this is pretty important. So we understand, or we would claim to understand, the relative merits of the following companies, the 6 big platforms, so Google, Facebook, Amazon, Tencent, Alibaba, and TikTok, which is part of ByteDance, Apple and Microsoft, Adobe, Oracle, Salesforce, IBM, SAP, Twitter, Snap, Pinterest, LG, Samsung, Spotify, Netflix, Shopify, JD.com, Xiaomi, Epic, Kaohsiung, all these companies. I mean, we don't care really, well, we do care, but we don't worry about the relative merits of all those companies. What we worry about is the growth of the digital pie. And as long, you know, we're a royalty on the growth of digital, basically. And we've divided our business now into 3 areas, 3 practices: content, 60%, data and analytics and digital media, 30%, and 10% tech services, which we've just gone into and are expanding rapidly in that area. So that's better. And then cheaper is about efficiency. So we go to market as faster, better, cheaper. And then finally, we have a unitary structure, very different to the WPP structure or the Saatchi structure, multi-brand, primarily to deal with conflict between a Ford and Unilever, or a GM and a Ford, or a Procter and a Unilever, primarily for that reason. But we think that creates too much fragmentation. You've got to have one P&L, have 8,200 people working together in a single P&L with a single purpose. So a single mission. So we think that's it. So it's very different to the models that we developed. So this is morphed over time in a very different way.
Yeah, that's really comprehensive, Sir Martin. So just very briefly, before I ask you some questions about management style, et cetera. So I'm quite old school and used to working with PR firms like Brunswick and Finsbury, but I see very little change in those organizations. How do you think they will change in the future to adapt to more digital?
Well, if they were here, they would disagree with you violently and say they change the norms. No, I think there is something in what you say around the fact that they're still very relationship driven and very sort of gin and tonic, lunch and dinner and entertainment driven. And I think there's something in that. What's interesting about the PR business is it's become better. The modern side of the business has become better because of social media. And so I would think, we do a lot of social media work. So our revenues last year were probably about $900 million. And of that 900 million, I would say something like 80 to 100 million was in the social media area. which, if you went back in time, you could almost classify as PR. I think the phrase public relations is probably a bad, somebody has come up with a better descriptor, because the world of public relations is typified by relationship and entertainment, whether it be breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and it's not heavyweight enough, I think, in many respects. Although the work that the firms you mentioned do, they tend to do a lot of M&A and crisis work, which obviously are really important, and where there's very little price sensitivity, because most of those projects or those scopes of work come out of the CEO's office, who is much less likely to go through exhaustive procurement processes in order, and also the timing, because these are not instant events, but they're events under pressure. But I'd agree with you that the PR firms, an Edelman, a Hill and Knowlton, a Conan Wolf, and a Burson Conan Wolf, have suffered historically by virtue of the fact they've been related to traditional media, newspapers, and linear TV, free-to-air TV, and they haven't naturally, because they've had an analog base to them, they probably haven't switched and morphed as rapidly as they should do.
Interesting. So 2 more questions for me, and then I'm going to hand over to the floor for questions. So S4 and WPP are huge businesses, and expansion comes with increased corporate governance, ESG, and regulatory requirements. How have you evolved yourself and your businesses to adapt to these increased requirements and responsibilities?
Well, it is difficult, as I hinted at before. I think people, our structure at S4 is really sort of a private equity company in a listed guise, and we have a standard listing, but not a premium listing. That we become, from zero to, as of today, 2.7 billion pounds market cap, so about $3.8 billion. And the answer to your question is, what's behind your question is a really interesting set of issues, because I do think running a listed company, I do not believe in manager-run companies. There's nothing wrong with them, but owner-managed companies are much better. So of our 2.7 billion in market cap, is about 1/2 of that, a little bit less, is in the hands of management. I think we behave in a totally different way to where, and this is not options, as Warren Buffett said, as I said before, this is actually people putting money where their mouth is. So I think that's critically important, because I think you get up in the morning in a very different way if you have something at stake, as opposed to a heads I win, tails you lose option arrangement, or even restricted stock, which is dependent on you just being there and not performance related necessarily. So I think the answer to your question is I think the world is changing, and I think the rise of private equity, those statistics around liquidity tell you that the world is changing. It's becoming much more shorter term, and private equity's investment horizon is about 3 or 4 years, 5 years. Tends, a very high cost of capital. As somebody said to me today, if Blackstone is an investor, their IRRs are 20 or 30%, and that's their cost of capital. So every year you delay, it's you have to get a 20% return, increased return, when you IPO out of an investment with a company like that. And the reason I bring that up is I think that in the listed sector is being squeezed. It tends to be run by manager-managed companies, where there is a separation between ownership and control. And I think it's becoming increasingly difficult. And I think people running listed companies are finding it increasingly difficult to deal with the issues that you mentioned. We're coming into our reporting season shortly on March the 18th. We're preparing our annual report again. It will be our 4th annual report as a listed company. I did 33 of them WPP, those reporting procedures have become much more sophisticated. I'm not saying it's wrong, but people have a choice now. And I think the listed sectors, unless there's a better balance, I think, for example, the people that are on this call, or the people that are graduating from the Judge, or indeed other business schools or universities, are probably going to look at this and question whether they want to take on answering those questions that you raised. And the answer question is that we go with the flow on this. So the purpose and ESG and DE&I issues, which are extremely important and have become more important, particularly in the last few years, are front and center in our thinking. But the point that I'm making is that I think the burdens that it puts on the business are so significant that if you're entrepreneurial, and most of the people on this call are meant to be that, which by the way means that the word entrepreneur means risk taker. So it's not taking a risk with other people's money, it's taking a risk with your own money. If you're moving into an entrepreneurial career, I think the odds are now that you're probably more likely, at least initially, to do it in the private markets, and not as prone as we were or I have been in using the listed markets. I think there's a change taking place, and if you look at that in the venture capital markets, you look at that in the private equity markets. I think that the answer to your question is, you can cope with it, but it makes life so complicated for some, and so time consuming for some, that they want to look at how they can do it in different ways. The time frame comes back to what it said in relation to what my father said, that, and again, I was thinking about this today, the time frames have been so compressed that I think people are starting to look at, I had a conversation with somebody this morning. It was an interesting conversation. He said, a German guy who had invested in a startup, which he knew nothing about. He came from the media industry, and this was a food company, which startup, a couple of young Germans that he met, and he invested in it personally. And this is a company that they sold the startup to a major packaged goods company. So they started with nothing, literally a $250,000 investment, and sold it for $400 million about 5 years later. And what he said was very interesting. He said, he'd been advising these two young Germans on how to develop business. And he said, don't expand beyond Germany. Focus on Germany. And the selling idea, it's an interesting phrase, the selling idea will be expanded to whoever was buying, was you leverage that business beyond Germany into France, Italy, Spain, or wherever it happens, UK, where it happens to be. Let that be what the buyer did, not what you did, because you expanding from Germany into France, Italy, and Spain put too much strain on you, and you can sell the dream. It was quite interesting. Right. So it made me think again of what is going on. I think you're getting a lot of that. People get an idea, people on this call will get an idea, they'll expand, they'll implement the idea, they'll expand it. And what he said was very astute, which is, when you do these things, you have to think about the exit. It's like you've built a business, Cheryl, and you sold it. And you thought about it. And what you said to me when we were talking about it in the agreement was you did your earn out and then you moved on. Well, of course, for the buyer, that's not necessarily what you want to do. There's a life beyond the earn out. And I look at things differently. I look at them much, much more long term. And I did WPP for 33 years. I was at Saatchi's for 9 years. We started this at, however long I live. This is what, 3.5, 4 years. So, I look at it very long term. And again, it comes back to what my dad said. I think, people should think very carefully about what they want to do. And I think what's happening now is that you see it in private equity, you see it in venture capital, you see it in the listed sector, with that stat. McKinsey say it's no longer than 12 years or 9 years, whatever it is. Average life of a CEO of a listed company, to your question before, is about 4 or 5 years. Yes. So people think in very bite-sized chunks of time. They don't think like my dad thought about his life over 40 years. They think about it, in a very much, so it's very different, maybe rightly so. I'm not saying it's wrong.
I think we could probably have a whole debate on absolutely the changes of corporate value and even and corporate governance and implications on business. Sir Martin, just one last question, and just very briefly. So entrepreneurs, especially those with type A personalities, are often subject to criticism. How do you handle criticism that is not always constructive? And what is the worst thing that has been said about you, and how did you go about remedying that?
That I'm a micromanager, which I believe is a positive, not a negative. I was talking to somebody today who said it was a relatively small thing inside our business. He said he was surprised I spend time doing it. I said, well, I'm interested in everything, not because you want to necessarily influence everything, but because you want to understand what's going on. And I think that's the reality is entrepreneurial people are like that. They like to, you do get people who focus on one aspect of the operation and not in its totality. But maybe it's sort of Jewish retail background that's my father had. Where you examine the daily sales statistics or the weekly sales statistics. But I think understanding what's going on, natural inquisitiveness is really extremely important. No, I mean, on criticism, I mean, you and I, when we talk about the briefing session about compensation and controversy around compensation, that's like water off a duck's back. All the conversation that I've had has been related. It hasn't been options. It hasn't been heads I win tells you lose options or restricted stock, which you just have to stick around to get. It's always been on the basis of performance. Might be tied to absolute share price levels, relative share price levels to a group of competitors, a total shareholder return relative to a group of the competitors over time. In the case of S4, it's very much geared to shareholder return over a long period of time, so equivalent to a private equity carry. So criticism is not something that, I mean, everybody has a view, and that's fine. We live in a democracy, as the Prime Minister was saying, when in relation to the criticism of him and Partygate, people can express their view, so that's fine.
Excellent. So water off duck's back. Thanks, Sir Martin. We have quite a number of questions from students. So I'm going to hand over to Michaela, who will ask the questions. Michaela.
Good evening, Sir Martin.
Hi.
Thank you so much for taking the time. We have brilliant questions lined up, so let me start with the first one. With the recent acceleration of M&A activity within the digital advertising space, do you think there's still space for disruptive innovation by startups, or will we be seeing more consolidation leading to increased dominance by the big corporations? And if there is a space for innovation, which areas would you look into and invest into today?
So was that in relation to which industry was the questioner talking about? Digital, how did he or she describe it?
It was a digital advertising space.
Okay, well, I don't think there has much, I mean, apart from Accenture, and apart from the private equity, I mean, certainly the holding companies have been absent from the field. Now they make noises about, for example, Dentsu, who have got a disastrous record from an acquisition point of view. In my view, Dentsu should go back to Japan just focus on Japan. They won't like me saying that, but they should forget about international. They should sell it to somebody else and focus on their Japanese business. But they said that they're going to go into deals again and pay 15 to 20 times EBITDA. Well, that's probably the best thing from our point of view, because they will again have say mediocre success, to say the most. So I would say the consolidation will continue. There will continue to be very significant deal flow. Maybe not quite at the valuations that have been before, because with interest rates rising and with the rotation from growth to value in the markets that we've seen, I think it's inevitable that pricings will come down. Private equity will not be as vibrant as interest rates rise. I mean, it's all going to be conditioned by the relative levels. I mean, interest rates would have to go a long way and further, I think, than the market thinks it will do for there to be major impact on the PE industry. It'll still be a force. But I would say the major competitive forces for us will continue to be Accenture, will continue to be the private equity houses. We're moving more into the technological services space. So content, as I said before, is 60% of our business, and data analytics, digital media, 30%, and tech services, 10%. We should be making another move in tech services shortly. So I think there's plenty of disruptive stuff to do. I don't think it's going to be limited. We'll have to see what the holding companies do. They have an analog problem. They have the analog albatross around their neck. I mean, the last year has been kind to them, and this year has been kind to them because of the huge fiscal and monetary stimulus around COVID. So I would say you'll continue to see significant consolidation activity, with room, to answer the question, with room for disruption. Some of our so-called disruptive peers have sort of gone from the battlefield, less active. I can think two that have sort of paled. The other two, probably four that we sort of focus on most. The other two are pretty active, but maybe not as active as they used to be. But I would say the principal competition for us will continue to be Accenture, which is a machine, huge machine, 250 billion, maybe a little bit less now, machine. And then the tech services company, Globant, Proficient, ThoughtWorks, CI&T, EPAM, Endava. Those are the companies that will increasingly compete.
Brilliant, thank you so much. From the chat, I can see that you are a role model to many of us. So a bit of a different question coming up now. What advice would you give to graduates and the comparison to your father's advice and nowadays? Do you think it's better to gain experience in the industry first through consulting, etc., or go straight into a startup environment? And secondly, with all your responsibilities, people would love to know how you unwind and brush off stress at the end of the day. Do you get
I don't. It's very simple. I'm full on all the time. There is no boundary between work and play. I mean, if something is fun, go back to my father's advice. I mean, it's fun, and therefore you do it because it's fun, not because it's stressful. I mean, everybody gets stressed, and stress is when you're not enjoying it. So the answer is, I don't turn off in that sense, and so I don't. I might watch something on cricket or something like that, but we'll do skiing very occasionally, or sit in the sun for 10 days or whatever. But no, the answer. The first part of the question was what? What was it again? Remind me.
That was about what advice would you give to graduates?
So look, apart from learn code and learn Chinese, let's take that as read. I think if I was coming out of Cambridge or again, I mean, I still would go to B school. It's not going to be something that the judge wants to hear, but if I was British, I would want to go to a foreign school. I think I'd still go to America, to be honest. I'm involved with IESA and CEIBS and the Indian School of Business and all that, but I think I would still go to America. I mean, this is very controversial. I think I would still focus on Harvard or Stanford. I guess if I wanted good weather, I go to Stanford. But if I got the opportunity, and I think consulting. I did consulting actually. I did marketing consulting when I left B school. It was good, and I worked on Clairol and Philip Morris, and it was really interesting. And it was more nuts and bolts consulting. I had to leave America because of the draft, believe it or not. My mother wouldn't let me go into the US Army, which was technically possible at that time because of the draft and the Vietnamese War. I don't think I would recommend consulting, actually. I know that the answer is it gives you, or one of the arguments is it gives you a broader range and experience, but I think I would pick out, I would take my dad's advice, and it's an industry that I enjoyed, a company inside that industry that I admired, and then might be a shorter time frame, get some good experience, develop that reputation as well, and maybe in a shorter period of time. Maybe I shouldn't have waited such a long time when I was at Saatchi's. I think I joined them when I was what was it, about 1975. So I was about 30, and I was 9 years CFO, and then I started WPP at 40. So maybe now, sort of paradoxically, sort of working ages have lengthened, but maybe start earlier. So I would still, say maybe B school, and then I probably would go to Asia. I think I probably would go, if I was starting again over. I think I'd go to, if you could go to China, or to go to India, or Brazil, or I mean, Argentina sounds crazy, but given the state of the economy, 50% inflation and 40% unemployment. But having said that, there's some really interesting opportunities in those parts of the world. So I think that's what I would do.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And probably our last question for today, but a very important one. What is your take on the current developments around user and data privacy? Are the key players, regulators, and industry as a whole moving into the right direction, or would you do anything differently?
No, I think the key players, and because I have a subjective interest here. So, our largest client is Google. Our second largest client is Apple. We're NDA'd on that, so we can't talk about that publicly, but do this on sort of closed things like this. And then third is Facebook, fourth is BMW, fifth is Mondelez, and sixth is HP. And then in our top 10 is Amazon, PayPal, T-Mobile, and PayPal. I think the platforms understand the issues they're facing. Clearly, Apple's IDFA decision, Google's deprecation of third-party cookies. I think that Google's decision was very smart, because it might have caused some short-term disruption, but long-term, it drives clients back at the end of the day to two sources for data, which is consented first-party data, that is consented because people give it up knowingly, or they should give it up knowingly, should not be hidden from the impact of it, and the signals themselves. So those are the two major data sources, and that's been a big opportunity for us. I think the big boys or the big girls understand, the big six, let's say, they understand both in the West and the East the challenges that they face, and they understand that they have to grow through organically. That's why I think you're getting a lot of buybacks. It's partly because of the way the market's gone recently, but primarily it's because they'll be using their money more and more to give back to shareholders. And the other thing is, companies like Facebook, which come in, or Meta, which come in for a heavy amount of criticism, and it's extraordinary the degree to which they're criticized, have made strenuous efforts. People like Scott Galloway, Kara Swisher don't think it's enough of an effort, but have made efforts to, they've hired 35, 40,000 people to monitor content. They put in protections on privacy, brand safety, the areas. Again, people don't think they take it strongly enough, but I think they are getting there. I think the major companies are, and they are going to be precluded. I mean, the regulatory stuff is going to be a preclusion around acquisitions. Look at Giphy, the CMA, and Facebook in the UK. I mean, that made no sense from a control from a monopolies or competition point of view. There's an alternative to Giphy that if Facebook started putting any pricing in, you just go. So it made, and it really was a clear message, I think, to Meta or Facebook that the CMA wouldn't tolerate any deals or whatever size, because it was a relatively small deal. So I would say they understand they're going to have to grow organically. They understand that means reinvestment in their business. They understand that they have to do something significant around privacy, brand safety, political interference, and that. So I think they have the message. There will be continuous pressure. I don't think they'll get broken up. I think what will happen over time is there will be continued pressure on deals, inorganic deals.
Sir Martin, you have been most generous with your time. I hope you're an honorary fellow of Christ College.
You're right.
Right?
Right.
I hope that you spend more time with us, maybe entrepreneurship ball here on the 22nd.
Okay. Well,
it's
I'll be coming up because the master of Christ is retiring, and new master has been appointed, and I'll be coming up with Simon Sharma to do a session with the fellows at Christ. So we'll have some fun doing that. So I will be up. I will be up there.
Oh,
and good luck.
And
good luck to everybody on the call. And thanks for organising it, Cheryl, and thank you, Michaela, and thank you, everybody.
We look forward to showing you around the judge when you come up next.
Okay, I know, I'd love to do that. It's a long time since I've been up to see there. So I hope by the time I get there, there's 1,000 MBA students there.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for your time.
Thanks very much.
And
pleasure. Okay, good.
Cheers.
See you soon. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Michaela. Thank you. God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye.